Philomythia podcast.
I felt like I was earlier than you guys.
It's fine. We'll work it out.
Welcome.
All right.
Jerry,
welcome.
clap
Welcome.
on time.
Welcome.
Well, Eric, we seem to have a third voice with us today.
We seem to have a third voice with us today. Third voice, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Third Voice, a.k.a. Jerry Ted Stenquist. I am the guest.
Nice.
Welcome,
nice.
Jerry. Welcome.
Welcome. One thing we should say is Jerry is the personage who does our music, and we've actually talked about Jerry a lot. So we'll give Jerry a chance to rebut our comments on his stuff, if he'd like to. If he remembers, he might be like, you said some things, man, and I don't remember what it was.
I definitely know that I definitely have forgotten everything,
Yeah.
but I do know that that it all needs rebutting.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was.
It all needs rebutting. That's amazing.
That's I had a feeling that might happen where Jerry's like, I need to refute all of this, but I don't remember what I'm refuting. So
Sometimes I'm surprised because you're like, oh, we had a character that was really off the rails this week. And I'm always like, what? I didn't think I was all that off the rails.
that's
He
usually
always
Ian.
messes things up. I'm pretty sure I'm not messing anything up, but I think I'm more flamboyant than I think.
Well,
I think that's usually Ian calling you out.
Oh, absolutely. And it's usually there's so many times where I'm talking about something that happened on the game on Friday. So we talk about whatever happened on Friday. So what did you guys think of yesterday's game?
It was fun.
It was great. I think that it's always hard to remember the game because I end up falling asleep halfway through. And we should caveat that the reason why is because I'm on the East Coast and everyone else is on the West Coast. So sometimes I'll be like, okay, guys, I'm out, but I'll listen as I fall asleep. I think that messes up my brain because some of it I'm listening to half awake, and then I'm like, they were in a store buying something? What happened?
I'm on the east side.
And then
I'm
somebody
on the west
says it
side.
later, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. It was mixed in with my dreams.
Right.
Nice.
And we've said that before too, that Jerry's usually out by a certain time. So like for instance on Mondays I try to gauge Jerry's awakeness level, and that's usually when we end, when Jerry's like, guys, I'm fading. I got about 20
Well,
minutes.
I remember last night I woke up for a second. You guys were like, Kai, what are you gonna do? Oh, he's asleep. No, I want to do this. I'm go back to bed. Or last night I was snoring and it was like, Jerry's snoring again.
Yep.
Oh, that did happen, yeah.
We all started yelling at you.
Oh, we all started yelling too, but that was after the game was over.
That's... Sorry. That is, that's probably what happened. You guys were yelling and I was like, oh, I better wake up.
Yep.
Say something.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, they're just yelling at me.
So today we're gonna do kind of a music theme.
Oh.
So we're gonna ask you some questions, Jerry, and you can answer them if you feel so inclined. And then we'll just kind of take it from there.
Yeah, let's do this.
So how long, you're a musician, and we're all musicians here. We've talked about this before, but how long have you been playing music?
Yeah, good question. I started as a little kid, as one does when their parents make them take piano lessons. And then I eventually fought hard enough that my parents quit and let me quit. But I ended up starting back up again in junior high when playing guitar was the thing to attract ladies and be cool, and starting to get into that. So I started to kind of pick up the guitar, and that was 7th grade, 8th grade. But then I went to a arts school and focused on music when I was there, and everyone else was playing guitar, so I needed a way to differentiate myself. So I went back to my roots and did some piano and keyboard, so I had people to play with and they would want to play with me, and I started to do that so I could get my foot in the door and be a part of their bands. But it quickly became apparent that I enjoyed a lot more And when I really got into it, I just fell in love with it because it's diverse, and it allowed me to understand music theory and composition and all those things that I ended up actually being what I was actually passionate about. So, I've been at it for, 30 years on and off. I kind of took a break there as I had little babies, and we went to, I went to law school and all that. But yeah, about 30 years now.
Law school.
Yeah. Schma school.
And then this is going to tie into what's coming up. So it's going to seem like an offhanded question, but it'll make sense for the listeners. It'll make sense later on. How long have you been playing video games and, of course, RPGs and everything in that arena?
Yeah. So I would say my background with gaming, and I guess, now tabletop gaming, which is kind of a lot of the focus of the conversation apparently on your podcast, at least episodes I've listened to. Mm-hmm. And, but that all started with me actually with role-playing gaming, RPGs, and video games, right? So if you look at the old school Nintendo systems, I was really big on those, particularly the first Dragon Warrior games.
Oh, wow.
Oh, okay.
That's crazy to hear that old school name.
Yeah, that first one was kind of my that was my jam, and then that first Final Fantasy, I played it a little bit, but I never owned it, so I never really got that much through it. But when I got a Super Nintendo, I played Final Fantasy IV, and I think that game changed my life. That soundtrack, I think, probably up until that moment was probably the best video game music ever written. Because their writer, and I'm nervous to say this on a podcast because I'm afraid I'm gonna say it wrong, Nobuo Uematsu.
I think that's right. Nobuo Uematsu, something like that.
Yeah, I know how it's spelled, but my tongue isn't used to that particular language, so Japanese. So it's hard for me to say it. Anyway, the point is that I got really into that, and I just remember, the thing about video game music is a little kid, you don't know music very well at that point in your life, but you're having this stuff play at you for 40 to 80 hours of stuff, and you start to be like, oh man, I really love that music. And I remember that intro music, which is kind of just the general Final Fantasy theme.
Is it the arpeggiated?
Yeah, that part. Yeah.
Nice.
That I just remember like being 8-9 years old and just sitting there on the menu screen listening to it, being like, that's great.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would you say is some of your top video game music, especially RPG music?
I mean, probably my favorite's the Final Fantasy music. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And I think now, as a grown-up musician, there's a reason why I keep on going back to that stuff. But some of my that's a great question. I think, some of the most modern stuff, I think that's been influential to my own personal music and stuff that I particularly like, that's popping out of my mind, modern stuff, is a game called Celeste.
Oh yeah.
And the composer for that's Elena Rain. And she's fantastic, and that's just kind of it really draws on that original like Nintendo, Super Nintendo sound, but it really gives it a modern, just this real modern feel to it that draws on modern electronic music, but she masterfully kind of brings it back to that old school. You don't really know what genre you're listening to. It's just really easy to listen to for hours and hours and hours as you die over and over and over in that game. Because that game is particularly, I feel like, is a difficult game.
It's tricky.
I found it very challenging.
Yeah,
I would agree.
So it's tough.
It's hard.
Yeah, it's a platformer. So,
and it seems like it hails back to that old school platforming where it's not going to give you an inch. You have to earn every little bit of level you have to earn it, rather than it being like, okay, do you want us to make it easier? Nope, you must suffer.
Yeah, and it's very deliberate in the way that they're drawing on that old school genre, because the graphics they're not quite Nintendo. You think, oh wow, this looks just like Nintendo graphics, and you go back and you're like, oh no,
it's nicer.
It's way nicer.
Yeah.
And which is actually a good point with the music too. And actually something that I modeled my most latest album off of is you listen to it and be like, it's just like old school Nintendo music. No, there's a lot of modern sounds in that stuff to help boost the bass, help kind of give it more of a full sound. Mm-hmm. But there's enough of that old school sound that you're like, oh yeah, this is like playing Nintendo. It's a little bit more than that. But
it seems like what people really want from this like 32-bit nostalgic genre of music and video games is they want what was good about it, but using all the modern tools, because the MIDI now and the graphics now, you can do so much more than you were able to before.
Right. And for those listeners that don't know what MIDI is the ability in your keyboard to use samples or recordings of other instruments to make it sound like that instrument, right? And as many of you could guess, in the last 20 years, the technology has just exploded such that you can play a keyboard, and if you can play it right, you can make violins actually sound like violins. And even I have a hard time nowadays telling the difference between a keyboard and an actual instrument. And it's subtle. You can pick up on it, but it might take me, some heavy listening for 30 seconds to be like, oh, yeah, actually, I think that's a keyboard.
It seems like you have to listen for like decay of the instrument or how it's hit. If it's too perfect, that's usually a tip off like, oh, wait, that's probably fake. You know what MIDI actually stands for? I just looked it up.
Oh.
Musical Instrument Digital Interface is what it stands for.
Yeah, that sounds right. I've learned that before.
Of course. It's not really worth remembering because MIDI is way easier to say.
Yeah, MIDI is just like such a term of art. Another thing I would want to mention if we're going to talk about some modern video game music, on the other end of the spectrum is like straight up drawing from film soundtracks and classical music. And that's the Ori and the Will of the Wisp series, the Ori series.
Oh, yeah. Ori and the Blind Forest.
Yeah. And that's the composer for that's Gareth Coker, and I think that for a lot of musicians, and the reason why I'll tell you why I feel confident about this, but that for a lot of musicians right now is the standard bearer for modern video game music. As far as if you want to get a really good professional orchestrated sound, that's what you want to see. And one of the reasons why is because they bring in the aspects of soundtrack when you're getting some automated parts of the game. You might be playing a game and then the game will take over and show you part of the story, and then it goes into soundtrack mode. Then it melds really well back into the repeated music that you would get with modern with traditional video game music, I guess. Anyway, the reason why I feel like that's a standard bearer is because I listened to a local orchestra that's a gamer orchestra called I want to actually get it right, the Greater Washington Video Game Orchestra, I think is what its full name. But they did an Ori and the Will of the Wisp song, and they're in their introduction they were saying that like this is basically some of the all-time favorites and grossing video game soundtracks of all time.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
It seems like the production value on that game in general is pretty high. Like, it's beautiful the way it looks. I think it's partially 3D too, right? It's not straight up 2D.
Yeah, it's actually, I mean, there might be a little 3D element in there, and the graphics might seem a little 3D.
But they're actually 2D.
But in its essence, it's 2D. Yeah.
Okay. I got a shout out to Darren Korb too, who's the composer for the Hades soundtrack.
Oh, nice.
Like that stuff, it's not orchestral, but it's like he's using like lots of time signature changes and odd instruments that sound like lutes and older instruments. So there's a lot of acoustic, and then suddenly it'll shift into like full metal heavy metal music. And I'm very impressed. I've taught a bunch of these songs to my students, and it'll go from like 11/8 to 7/4 to 6/8. Like, it's got a lot of cool stuff in there for a video game music soundtrack, which is usually all in 4/4 or maybe 6/8 most of the time.
Something that's actually interesting to me is I'd heard of Hades, but just like through people saying it, I never looked at it, didn't really give it much of a thought. And then you talked about the music. So I looked up the music and listened to the music and was like, oh, this is really cool. And then you were like, oh man, I bought Hades and it's so fun. So then I bought it. And the same thing kind of happened with Ori, is I had stumbled on the soundtrack. Never played the game, never even heard of it. I listened to the soundtrack and was like, what the fuck is this game? And so I looked it up, and you know, right as I looked it up, it's one of those Metroidvania games, and I love those games. So instantly I fell in love. I haven't got to play it, but I may have told Jerry about it, or Jerry had been playing it already, and I was like, dude, Ori and the Wisps, or Ori and the Will-O-Wisps?
No, actually, no, I think this is what happened. I knew that it existed. I knew I wanted to play it. And then you said, oh, you have to listen to that soundtrack. And I said, great. And I listened to it, and I think I bought it that night. The game.
Nice. Yeah.
And then I had the game beat in like 2 days.
Yeah.
I think Ori and the Will-O-Wisp, I think it had been released recently too. So when you bought it, I think that was a more current release, because that's a sequel.
Yeah. Because it's the Haunted Forest or the something forest.
Ori and the Blind Forest.
Blind Forest is the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a good question. I thought they were reversed, and that the Blind Forest was made as a prequel.
It might be a prequel, but it came out first. And I know this because my nephew raved about that game like 7 years ago. And I wanted to play it, and this is a call to action. I wish they would port that to consoles, because you can only play it on a Windows machine. So that's why I haven't played it, because it looks awesome.
Oh, I want to play it so bad.
Yeah, it looks really cool, but I have no way to play it at the moment.
So as we're sitting here, I decided, you know, if we're going to talk about stuff that I listen to, stuff that I think is interesting, I just pulled up my work playlist, like the stuff that I, you know, my day job is, I'm an attorney. It's a desk job, so I usually put headphones in or have some music on. And so if I'm looking through, just to name like a handful that I like, we have the Zelda stuff, which is great. Over the years. Some of that's been really great. Undertale.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, people rave about Undertale.
Yeah, some other Square games. Xenoblade, Chrono Cross, Chrono Trigger.
Woo!
We have Octopath Traveler, which is on Nintendo Switch. That one
I've heard of that one.
That brings up the Final Fantasy genre like to a T, and it's all orchestrated, and it's just quintessentially just excellent execution on that.
Nice.
And then, a whole bunch of Final Fantasy. I do orchestrated. I do the original. Skyrim, Tetris.
Skyrim is good, yeah.
Classic.
A little bit of, let's see, World of Warcraft.
Oh, yeah.
Shadow of the Colossus.
Oh, very good.
That's a great game, yeah.
Street Fighter 2. That composer for Street Fighter 2 actually did Final Fantasy 15.
Oh, nice.
Oh, what?
And so I really like that. And if I were to like say one last one that I thought that deserves a mention, that really that I listen to a lot, is this the soundtrack to I Am Setsuna.
Ooh, very nice.
Which is kind of a love letter to the old school RPG Chrono Trigger. And but the entire score is pure piano, and I wouldn't normally like that, even though I'm a pianist. But it's really good. It's like some of my favorite piano music ever, and they do a good job of getting kind of really full sound. You can tell this piano player is really technical and really good and impressive, and it, you know, a lot of people that play that game say it's just so sad. It's a really sad game.
It is pretty sad.
The whole vibe, it's winter, the whole game. And the piano music is just makes you feel like kind of just really melancholy the whole time. And if you're not in a place in your life right now where you want to have like those evoking emotions, then don't play it. But in a way, it's good to have music to help you process if you have some sadness in your life, to play a game like that, because it will immerse you in some sadness, and like it will bring you along to give you some hope too. So as far as an artistic genre and the way that mixes music and storytelling, I think that's a really great honorable mention.
Nice.
And if you like to wallow in sadness, then you could play that game too and just hate the world. That's also a thing.
Yeah.
Speaking of some music that I want to, because we're kind of shouting out some things, I think Eric would want to shout this person out as well.
Oh, I know exactly who you're going to talk about.
Oh, exactly. I knew you would. It's Ben Prunty.
Oh, he's the man. He's probably my top.
He's definitely in my top video game music that's modern. And if you like listening to video game music, my favorite video game music he's made is called Into the Breach. Is the one that really...
It's a good one.
Every time I turn that on, I could listen to the whole album and just be like, wow, that's really cool. Very vibe, very chill. There's tensionous songs. It lends itself so easily to dramatic or just background. So good.
It's some of the only music I can listen to when I'm planning or writing. Some of that is there's no singing in it. The one album that I've listened to probably maybe hundreds of times just on repeat is an album of his called Photographs. And here's the thing why I say he's one of my favorite composers, because I haven't played any of his games, but I've listened to like all his music, and I think it just speaks to how good he is. It would be cool to see him get signed on for like a big AAA game.
Oh,
I think
so too.
I think he has a talent for it, for sure.
Jerry's definitely heard this music a bunch too, because he plays in all of the campaigns.
We play it. We play it all the time.
Yeah, it's definitely on my video game playlist. I have. I was gonna say too. Another one that Eric introduced me to was Disasterpiece.
Disasterpiece is amazing. They're really good.
And he did the soundtrack to Hyperlight Drifter, which is also another, because of the music, is pretty sad too.
Yeah,
I feel sad when I watch that, play that game in a good way. I mean, it's engaging, but
it's kind of a dying, dead world.
Mm-hmm.
Things are falling apart, so it has those motifs of loss and destruction in it, for sure.
And that one's much more electronic, much more draws on traditional video game keyboard sounds than say some of these other ones. But maybe the listeners that are more into tabletop more than video games, a lot of you probably at least listen to a lot of stuff that draws on kind of that medieval vibe of maybe Dungeons and Dragons or something like that, or like the Baldur's Gate soundtrack, Elder Scroll, like some of those, even the Dungeons and Dragons games are really great, and even have some historically accurate sounds and instruments, and they're all very, very professional.
Right.
So that whole genre is just like very professionally sounding. The orchestration is just wonderful. I'm thinking like Witcher, or anything that's like high fantasy-ish.
Oh, The Witcher's so good. Yeah,
Witcher's great.
Yeah.
I would say really quick, it was cool to see. I want to say it was season or campaign 2 of Critical Role. They actually got they were able to play the Skyrim music like officially. Like they were able to get the licenses to play that music. So
that's really cool.
Yeah, it's AAA music for AAA games, and Skyrim is so huge, it's like in the culture. Another, I don't really care for the band. It was a band that did the soundtrack, but the soundtrack to Gris is phenomenal. It's really, really good.
Oh, yeah. That one is another one that just like, I feel like the music ties that game together.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's such a, I don't know, there's probably an artistic word to frame what it is, but it's minimalist in its delivery. It doesn't have a lot of dialogue, and a lot of it artistic interpretation to what's happening in the game, but it's still so emotional, and it really gets you into it.
I would say, too, Gris, for anybody who doesn't know, and of course there will be links in the Dooblydoo, but it looks very hand-drawn. It's very 2D flat style, but I would say that the use of the music and color together, because it starts off very monochromatic with a lot of gray, and as you kind of unlock the world, things start to grow more and you get more color, so you'll get, like, suddenly you get this burst of green, and the music will change with that. And I would say, so those two elements, yeah, they totally make that game have the impact that it does.
Yeah.
You know, it's really cool, for sure.
I would definitely say that it, you know, I would suggest that people, yeah, I mean, that's one of the most artistic games I've ever played.
It's really good. Now, we should say one thing about that game that I feel is you're starting to see more games like this, but it's the one that I played that really hit it the most. Is the game is basically each level is a stage of grief. So when you start the game, this character is basically completely broken, and they don't really explain why, but there's been a loss. And then as you go through it, each level is this character working through this grief and loss, and so by the end, it's very emotional, and they really nailed it. They don't hit you over the head with like therapeutic terms or anything like that. It's very just in the milieu of the game itself, you know. Highly recommend it. I think you can play it on Steam too. I played it on PS4, but I'm pretty sure it's available on all platforms. I could be wrong on that, but
I actually think you're right, at least with Xbox and PlayStation, because I know somebody that played it and they don't have a PlayStation.
yeah.
So
I think it's on Steam too.
yeah, it could be, like, very well could be.
I bet it is, yeah.
Yeah. Good steamy.
Good steamy, baby.
Good creamy steam. The one person I want to mention last, and then we can actually ask Jerry. Jerry has his own music project. The stroking is starting, you guys. Stroking out.
Stroking out.
Is Todd Baker. So he did the Monument Valley soundtracks, which I haven't played. I've heard they're fun. But he also has a band. I keep telling Jerry to listen to them. What is their band's name? I might not be able to find it right now. But he's got like a fusion jazz band. And you can hear those influences in the Monument Valley games. Where, again, interesting stuff with time and rhythm and harmony that you don't hear a lot in just your standard game music. And that's not to say standard game music isn't great. But it's cool when you actually get serious musicians doing interesting experimental stuff on the soundtrack. I like it a lot.
I dig that.
Yeah.
I'm into it.
Yeah. I was going to say, oh yeah, Fez, but that's Disaster Piece. We already talked about it. Disaster Piece is awesome.
Yeah, that's right.
Ian, you got any others for us?
Some stuff. I mean, a lot of the video game music that I've been into lately really revolves around more modern stuff. Other than, I mean, Jerry mentioned it. Chrono Trigger will always be like very special to me, and I believe that's Nobuo Uematsu as well.
Is that him as well?
It might not be.
I actually don't think so, but
Yeah,
I thought it was somebody else.
could be.
I feel like I need to Google that right now.
So I love that. I love Chrono Trigger. I'm also a huge Final Fantasy fan, but music that I've been using a lot of, I loved and still love a lot of the stuff that Destiny has created. A lot of the Halo, Martin O'Connell, I think is his name, and some of those guys that were really a big part of creating some of that Halo music, and then they went with Bungie to make Destiny. So there's been a lot of really, really cool music that's come out of those games, and I'm a big fan of that. I love those. As they keep coming out with expansions, you get a chunk of music again, and I feel it's very vibe-ish for the genre that they're in.
Right.
So there's definitely ones that stand out for me is those Halo and Destiny.
Halo's
sounds.
super good.
Yeah,
Like the music for that, I forget about it, and then I'll listen to it. I'm like, oh, this is like classic and epic and all the things you want from your AAA soundtrack,
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and I mean, most people that are in any type of video game, you play them that like Halo theme, just that original ba ba ba
ha 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 ha.
Yeah, everyone recognizes it. It's like, oh, that's Halo. Like,
for sure.
It's very, very recognizable.
Right.
So that's cool. I mean,
Speaking of Halo, I am super excited for the Paramount Plus series.
holy dude, that is
very excited. Jerry, have you seen that trailer?
I have, but
Yeah.
I get really skeptical when IP that I like and think is cool IP is transferred to another genre.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm always like, I just don't know if they can deliver on it.
Oh, I do too, for sure. Yeah.
I've been let down too many times.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get me wrong. I'll watch it and I'll probably enjoy it for what it is because I know how to do that. But nevertheless, I stop myself from getting too excited.
Right. And video games are notorious for having bad adaptations, for sure.
Yeah.
But I would say that you're starting to see series like Arcane, I think, is just one of my favorite series, hands down.
oh, it's so good.
You're starting to see some better ones. That one I'm actually excited for. There's some other IP that I'm worried about, though.
I think with the Halo IP, they've already had a foray into live action stuff. And
Yeah, you know who the director was? It's the guy who did District 9
oh, crazy.
and Elysium. What's his name?
And did he do the it's been a long time since I've watched that movie, but I remember that there's, I've watched all of the Halo stuff they put out there. So I think that this new thing
Neil
is,
Blomkamp is his name.
oh, nice.
Yeah, so he did those little shorts.
I think the new one will do really well. I think that they've had a few Halo things come out that haven't really landed as well as they would have liked with live action. So I think this one is like, they're like, okay, people want Master Chief and they want lots of Master Chief, or they want Spartans in Covenant combat. Like a lot of this kind of starting to delve into the story that we love rather than try to show us this side stuff that we're like, cool, show us what we want.
And you can tell they're trying to make it their flagship, their Game of Thrones, too.
Right.
So hopefully, fingers crossed,
Yeah.
hopefully we get to prove Jerry wrong.
Yeah.
If not, we'll bring him back on and be like,
Yeah.
you're right. You're right.
I have to Google Uncharted to see if that's doing okay. I never played those games, but
I heard it bombed.
Yeah, I mean they put money into it. They paid at least one well-known actor to be in there. So I thought,
Oh, well, it's got Mark Wahlberg and Spider-Man.
oh
and
yeah, that's
it's
right.
got huge
Tom Holland
actors.
and Mark
Tom
yeah.
Holland, yeah. I want to see it. I think part of the problem right now is that you're just not going to have as many people going to theaters.
Yeah.
Like, if they really want to get back to it, things have to be really stable for a long time, and theaters have to, or really the production companies have to manage their expectations, which they won't do.
Yeah, and they're already having a rough time.
Yeah.
Even before the pandemic, they were having a rough time. So,
Mm-hmm.
but I might go see the Batman tonight. We'll see.
Oh, nice.
Nice. I've heard it's good.
I've heard that's good too. On Uncharted, I actually did play 2 of those games. I played 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved them, man. They were a blast. Like 2 and 3, like they were so much fun to play through.
I played a bit of 2, and every time I played, I'm like, I just want to play Tomb Raider. Like, this is not, this just feels like a poor man's Tomb Raider. I know that's not the case, and people love those games, but for me, that's when I want to play that style, that's the one I always want to do. And I love the new Tomb Raider games. They're phenomenal.
Oh, they're great.
They're so great.
But I think that's a good, well, no, it's not good. It's a horrible segue to talk to Jerry about. He has his own music that he releases.
Yes.
What's your release name there, Jerry?
Yeah, so I publish under the name Player Character or the Player Character. If you look for Player Character and on any streaming service, Spotify, Amazon, you can see my music.
And you have a website too.
Yeah, I do. It's theplayercharacter.com.
Oh, professional.
Yeah,
You got the .com.
I got the .com, and it's a brand new website. So be charitable as I'm updating it and getting it to look more professional every day.
Sure.
But it's I just kind of put a lot of effort on the business side, in the last 3 months because I've been really prolific in writing music over the last couple of years, and I'm just starting to get to the point where I'm finalizing it and releasing it in album format, and And so I released an album in December, and it wasn't my debut album. I actually released an album a year ago, but this one was like this one was I put a little bit more effort into, as far as like maybe marketing, or got my own cover art and for the album, and
right.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about it.
So tell us a little bit about what led you to, because like you said, you kind of took a break from music, like it wasn't really your focus, and it seems like you really dived back into it. And when Jerry says he was prolific with music, you might think he's being glib. He's not. He's written, probably hundreds of songs at this point? Like, it's a lot of music.
Yeah, some of that's garbage, but, like,
right.
There's probably like 3 or 4 dozen songs that I'm like, yeah, I'm proud of that. I want to finalize it, get it, ready for.
Right. But just in terms of how much you've written, it's a lot.
Oh, yeah, a whole lot. Yeah, and in fact, that's kind of what I'll often do to like calm myself down, is I'll sit down and I'll improv something out while it's recording it, and then I'm like, oh, that's actually pretty good. Let me throw some strings on that real quick. And then I'll do another track. Next thing you know, I have 4 or 5 tracks, and I'm like, oh, that's a song.
Sweet.
So a lot of times it ends up being that way. Sometimes it's just a loop, or me experimenting with some MIDI sounds I bought or something like that. But
trying out packs.
Yeah.
New toys.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what it is. You get yourself a new MIDI pack, and you're like, what can I do with this? The next thing you spend an hour or two just messing with that one sound, and it's one of my favorite parts of. That's why keyboards.
And then you realize you're late to D&D. You're like, shit, it's 8 o'clock. Fuck.
That might have happened a handful of times.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Can neither confirm nor deny. So what led you back into this rekindling, if we can call it that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's really interesting. Like, when I was a teenager, going to art school and following that, I was really, that's kind of all I did for like 3 or 4 years, and got really into it. But then I think I just, I went to college, and I got it, I minored in music. Well, I first majored in music, then I switched to a minor and decided to do law school, and, part of that switching to English, or another philosophy or some other, law school adjacent undergrad degree.
Humanities.
Yeah. But I always stayed with it, and I played with bands on the side. One of those bands I played with, Eric played with me on, was Hourglass, and that we released an album on 2009, and that's the same year that I graduated. So once I kind of did that album, I moved to Washington D.C. and pursued my legal career, and got some stuff on my resume, and then went to law school. And getting into law school and going to law school just capitalizes your time. And I was in law school. I played with like the jazz band with the undergrad students at George Washington, and then I played in a law school band, or it's just cover bands where we play at bars and stuff for our friends and stuff like that. But then you get so busy, like being a new associate in a law firm, and spend tons of time. You're working 60 hours a week, and,
right?
As they make you do, and you get out of law school. And then at one point in my career, I was moving back to DC. I moved away, and then I moved back, and I moved to DC 4 or 5 months before my family did, and I was basically a bachelor living in a basement apartment for 5 months by myself. And I ended up burning it. Oh, a huge chunk of that was the government shutdown. I work for the federal government now, and that shutdown that happened now, I guess 3 years ago, that lasted 45 days or something.
Right.
There's nothing to do. So I pulled out my keyboard and set up my computer and turned on GarageBand, which comes to like all Mac computers. And next thing you know, I had like 10 songs under my belt. And I was like, I wrote all those songs in like an hour.
Right.
And they're not bad. In fact, I think one or two of them ended up on this latest album in one way or another. And, after that, I was like, yeah, this is super easy. And all of a sudden, like, I felt this aspect of my life that I had missed come back. And I was like, oh, a piece of my soul has returned. Mm-hmm. Welcome, soul. But because I had kind of put that aspect of myself away, I lost the need to be a rock star or make money off of it. I already had like money coming in somewhere else. And the timing of life was like, I can make music now. And now I can actually afford gear too, which is nice. A nice plus.
For sure. So it was kind of, you were forced to do nothing in a way where you're like, I have all this time. My family's in a different state. And so this natural creativity just kind of came out of that process.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I think I was so stressed out in my prior life with like little kids and job. Then I went to going super busy to like nothing to do at all. And I spent like 2 weeks like vegging out, watching, like playing video games and watching movies and TV shows.
Yeah.
And after like 2 weeks of vegging, all of a sudden I was like, all right, I'm ready to do a hobby.
Do something.
You know, I got that vegging out of my system, was fully relaxed. Now my brain was like, aren't you kind of sick of watching TV? You want to do something else?
That brings up a point that creativity of any kind, let's say if we bring it back to RPGs, if you're going to DM, like you need some space so that you have the mental bandwidth to maybe waste some time and then be like, okay, like I want to make something. I want to create something. I want to do something with my time other than just passively consume, I think that's really cool. It's been really cool to see you get back into this arena of your life that used to be such a big part of it. Like back in high school, Jerry was the music kid.
Oh, all the time.
He was. If we had theory questions, Jerry was the person we'd go to.
If you were at school almost all the time, you'd hear him playing on the piano.
Yep.
Almost all the time. So often he'd just be in there playing, and then he wouldn't for a little bit, and then he'd be back in there.
Or he'd bring his big Kurzweil keyboard over to the house, and we'd record really silly songs.
Good times.
I still got it. I'm pointing at it on the screen right now. It's still there.
Right?
Yeah.
I basically just use it as a MIDI controller now, but...
I remember Jerry saying to me when he first got it, because it was like super nice, top of the line, he's like, I feel like this keyboard's too good for me. I don't want to play it. I don't want to touch it. It's too good. It's like, shut up, Jerry. Play your keyboard.
My wife actually makes fun of me on this thing because we make real grown-up money and we can buy nice things. And when we buy nice things, like, for example, we just bought a nice couch. And she's like, and I'm like, I don't know. Do we need such a nice couch? Like, happens all the time. And she's like, Jerry, it's not wrong to have nice things. I'm like, sure. Like, I'm uncomfortable with it.
Jerry's the hesitant one.
I'm uncomfortable with it.
I love that.
But do we need it?
I don't even think we've said this yet either, but maybe it's implied. But we've known Jerry for a long time, just like me and Eric have known each other for a long time.
We all went to school together.
I mean, how old were you when you started at the school? 15, 14, 16, somewhere?
I was 14. It was like 3 weeks before my 15th birthday, if I remember right.
Okay.
No. It was 3 weeks before my 14th birthday.
Oh, okay.
There it is.
I was 13. I was 13.
Was it in the fall or the spring?
It was the mid-April of 8th grade for me.
Nice.
It's
a special time. And so to kind of bring this back around, you know what? I'm going to cut myself off. One thing, too, I think is interesting about video game music and also the music we use on our tabletop RPGs is that it has to work in a loop. Like you need it to sound good, but you need it to sound good playing over and over and over. And I've noticed sometimes I'll play a piece of music. I'm like, nope. I've heard that twice. I'm done. We need something else. And so with because your player character stuff, Jerry, it has that like video game soundtrack vibe. Do you have that in mind when you write it? Like, I want this to, you be able to loop it if you wanted to?
Some of it, certainly. And I would say the stuff on this particular album, I would say probably not. Maybe one or two of them.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of took a pop song, as far as like song format is concerned, approach to them. It's a concept album, at least in my own brain, is that, concept album is where all the songs on the album work together in one way or another. Often it's telling the same story, like Pink Floyd's The Wall, or trying to think of like really popular.
The Who has the, what's it called? It's the Pinball Wizard soundtrack. Dream Theater, Scenes from Memory would be another one.
Yeah, so anyway, like just those that kind of seem like they all should go together, ones that tell a story. And mine is, this one's supposed to be for a video game that doesn't exist and is kind of telling a story of a journey. And I don't like to tell people what the story is about, but it's kind of a typical thing where there's a start, there's a beginning, it's adventure, there's something to save, it's called Quest to Save the Life Force. And I don't need to explain what the life force is, but it's kind of like this idea that you get often in video games or tabletop games where you got to save something, someone's in danger, and it's all on you to fix it, right? And so what does that sound like? So in a way, I kind of consider it adventure music. But one thing that I love that you brought up on that point, though, is that's why I would say video game music still differentiates itself from soundtrack music, because now the technology is starting to match up as far as like the sounds, right? They're not using old keyboard sounds like those old Super Mario sounds. You're using real orchestrated instruments, but you still have to get something that can be played over and over and over as you're dying, as you're trying hard, and it doesn't grate on the ears after you've heard it a handful of times, which is its own arts in itself. It has to be interesting enough to give you feelings while you play the game, but not interesting enough that it distracts from the game, and it can be played over and over and over.
And I think that's like been Prunty or some Disaster piece. That's why certain pieces I'll use when I DM for D&D, is because I can just have that on loop and nobody notices. You can just have it in the background as part of the vibe, and it doesn't get annoying, and it sounds good, and it adds to the vibe, and so
as I listen to the stuff like the stock music they have in Roll20, something like that, I think that's okay, but I think they should probably draw on a little bit more of this, be a little bit more intentional. And I get what they're going for. And some of it's, I'm sure, is good. I haven't been in it enough to like find out what I like, but
it's pretty underwhelming. They don't have a lot of options is the problem, and they make it really counterintuitive to find the options they do have. It's tricky.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of work they could do on that end. And maybe I should give them a phone call and say, hey, look.
You should.
I know what you're going for.
Yeah.
I think we can do this. And
you should hire me.
You should hire me. I will
make you some music.
Well, if I had, if I could do it, but that's the problem is that you need a whole lot of it.
Yeah.
Because you'll need
a whole vastly you need some dungeon music and Dwarven Hall music and city music and yada yada yada.
Elven forest.
Yeah, magical forest music.
But there's definitely stuff that I've written where I'm like, this is like a Final Fantasy game, and you're just buying items in the village, right? And so it's like happy, it's cozy, there's no bad guys. And then the other stuff I write where it's like, yeah, this is a battle song, this is a fight song.
Yeah, for sure. Before I forget, we have to shout out to the Final Fantasy VI Pixel Remaster.
Oh, yeah.
And how phenomenal the music. They totally redid the music on it, and it's really good. I really love what they've done, and it's the same thing where it sounds like the old stuff, but all the instruments are redone, so it's taking the best of the old and marrying it with the technology we have now to make it just sound like just shibby.
Yeah.
Shibby is the only word. Fucking shibby.
And I haven't told you, but I actually bought Final Fantasy V.
Oh, the Pixel remaster?
The Pixel remaster.
Nice.
And it's the same thing.
Yeah.
The soundtrack to 5 isn't as iconic as the soundtrack to 6.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still got some really great tunes. And then now with the modern instruments, it's just way better. Pop in my nice headphones and I'm just like, oh yeah, it makes the vibe way better. But I know the music well enough to say, yeah, those are the exact same parts. But and they do add some flourishes, some stuff that's not in the originals, but it's tasteful. It doesn't take away from it. It still is true to the original, and so even a hardcore traditional Final Fantasy fan like me, I have no problems with it. I think it's only improvements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I keep seeing on YouTube a lot of people are talking about how the 6 pixel remaster might be the best version of 6 ever. Like that, people are really stoked about it. And I hear rumor that they might be bundling, because you can't play them on consoles, which is weird. It's very strange, but they might be bundling 1 through 6 as a pixel remaster bundle and porting that over to consoles, which I'm like, oh, I'll buy that.
Oh yeah.
Because I've never played some of the installments, like 2 I've never played, 1 I've never played. I don't know how far I'd get through 1 because I heard it's a slog.
Well, it's less of a slog because they speed up the battle. You can go
you can speed it up?
Yeah, you go into system settings, and I think it's for 6 too if you haven't done it. You can go and speed up your battle speed, and then you can put it on auto if you just want to do basic attacks, which is really helpful. So I have done the same with Final Fantasy 1. I didn't beat that one till it was on computer on a ROM, and then you could speed it up there, and so I got through Final Fantasy 1 finally. 2 I've never played, and people are like, oh yeah, that one's the ultimate slog.
It seems like it's not till you get to like 4 where they really start finding their stride, where it's like, oh, this feels like a Final Fantasy game now.
Yeah. 3's good enough that it saved the franchise.
Right.
3 is pretty good, and that's the first job system, Final Fantasy.
Oh, okay.
And so that one, I say to Final Fantasy fans, yeah, give that one a try. It would definitely not the first one I would suggest.
Yeah, don't start there.
But 4 is where you're like, oh, I'm playing a totally different game. This is not
right.
And there were a lot of good games in its era, but Final Fantasy 4 was the first time people were like, oh, I can tell meaningful stories on a video game.
And 4, just to confuse everybody, when it got released in the US, was released as Final Fantasy 2.
Yeah, we should be clear with that.
And 6 was released as Final Fantasy 3 because there was a whole bunch of weird importing garbage, basically. Yeah. So, but 4/2, yeah, it's really good. I played that one till I didn't beat it, but I got all the way to where you get to the moon. Like your airship, you fly to the moon, and it's like, this is weird, crazy fantasy. Like, it's very strange.
Yeah. I remember as a 9-year-old being like, wow, that's pretty crazy. And then I don't want to spoil things for listeners that might, if you play Final Fantasy 14 and you haven't played the recent expansion, just plug yours and go la 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 la. But you get to go to the moon on that, and they play they play the Final Fantasy 4 music while you're there on the moon.
Oh, nice!
It's clearly a callback to Final Fantasy 4.
That's cool.
When you're on the moon and you meet some characters that you met on the moon, in Final Fantasy 4 and stuff like that, and you're like, ah, yeah. And it was just like, when I played that, I was like, all the joy from my childhood came back, and I was like, this is the best.
That's why Jerry loves the latest installment so much.
Right.
Because of the moon.
Yeah, that makes sense, though. That's cool.
Yeah.
All right, so to kind of cap off our regular episode with our first guest, first of all, thanks for coming on, Jerry.
Yeah, Jay, thanks.
Oh, my pleasure.
It was awesome having you.
Yeah, it was awesome.
I love talking and hearing the sound of my own voice.
So do I. We all do. That's what you get from going to art school, like hearing yourself talk. Jerry did a little. He did a special song that we're going to debut, and Ian and I, we've been saying something on the podcast for like months now, which is force damage rules, and you're about to find out why we've been saying this. Not just because it's funny, but Jerry wrote a little song that's taking clips of our old Friday group. So Ian's running the Friday group currently. This is from the Conan campaign when our friend John was running it. And so what you're going to hear is John running the game, and then our friend Harley does what only Harley can do. And Jerry made a song out of it. And what are we calling it? Just Force Damage? Is that the actual title of the song?
Yeah.
Force Damage Rules?
I have it right now here as the D&D mix, but that's just because at that time I didn't have a title. But it's the name of it's Force Damage, yeah.
Force Damage, D&D mix. So this is the world debut of Force Damage. Enjoy, listeners.
Nice.
So, how did you kill this hill giant?
Just like,
Right?
okay, I guess I pulled my bow back. I just hustled up, and then I went and throw another one, and they just both went, and both right in the both eyes. Demon, demon, demon. Click. Demon, demon. Pew pew. Demon, demon. Goblins going down. Goblins going down. Goblins going down. Goblins going down. But I'm also gonna do my force damage. Force damage. Which was 1d6 coming at you. Here it comes. Goblins going down. Goblins going down.
Let's forget about that.
This is a little add of
down.
Little spice of me.
Goblins going down. Force damage. Force damage. Which was 1d6. Coming at you. Here it comes. Goblins going down. Goblins going down. So then we'll go pew, pew, a poo boof, and boo doo, and here comes the tut and here that hurts and go good.
Break it down.
Force damage, force damage. Force damage, force damage. Pew, pew, a poo boof, and boo doo, and here comes the tit and here that hurts it. Pew, pew, a poo boof, and boo doo, and here comes the tit and here that hurts it. Force damage, a poo boof, damage, and here comes the tit and here that hurts it. Force damage, a poo boof, damage, and here comes the tit and here that hurts it. Force damage, a poo boof, damage, and here comes the tit and here that hurts it. Force damage, a poo boof, damage, and here comes the tit and here that hurts it. Force damage, force damage was.
So there you go, guys. Force Damage rules and gals. So, Jerry, I don't know if I ever asked you this. How long did that take you to put together?
Well, it probably took like, so we record our D&D sessions on Zoom, and I went through 2 or 3 sessions and skimmed them real quick through, and Harley tends to do his thing during like battles and when it's his turn.
Right.
So I would go to a battle, and if it was his turn, I'd slow down, and there's always something. Like, he has 2 shots with his bow and arrow. Pew, pew.
Right.
It's always like that, right? So it probably took me like an hour or 2 of collecting clips. And then there was like 1 or 2 things where he actually sung something that I was like, oh, that'll be my bass. So like when he's like 2, a poof poof, a doo doo. Like to me, he like nobody's telling him to do this, and I was like, well, there's a song. That's the song. That's it. So there's like 2 hours to do that, and then it's probably like another 2 hours to plug it all in. And Harley probably doesn't have a problem with me saying this. He's literally tone deaf, so he can't carry a tune. He's this type of tone deaf where he can hear the tones, but he can't sing the tones because his brain can't connect the two. And we've heard our fair share of that throughout our lives. But so whenever he loves to sing, and he'll always sing this stuff, and you're like, Harley, there's no key, there's no tonal center to what you just did. Anyway, so I did have to auto tune all this stuff. That probably took the longest part. Is just auto tuning it and then getting it on the tempo. But once that happened, like my parts, the instrumentation, that was the part.
I keep meaning to say this, but have you listened to Shoba Leader 1 at all?
I don't think so.
Oh, you would love it.
That's Square Pushers. Like, he had a band for a hot minute. When you go into that second part, the force damage, and it's got that almost distorted like vocoder, that sounds exactly like Shoba Leader 1. Like, you keep hearing it. I'm like, oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Especially since you haven't listened to it.
You'd like Shoba Leader 1, man. It's really cool.
You would like him, yeah.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, auto-tune is so part of the musical palette nowadays.
Yes, it is.
That it doesn't sound as weird anymore. But I remember when Cher came out with her song in like the 90s, it was really popular. And that was like the first big auto-tune that I had heard.
That was the first big, that's when it debuted as far as like a performance effect.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, where like it was, engineers used to use it to fix people when they weren't performing, perfectly, which happens, I guess, everyone. But but in this case, like, it was pure auto-tune, stuff that's totally off. To actually, the first time, there's some of that's not auto-tuned because I wanted to show people this is what he said.
Right.
But the force damage, that's just like one thing, and then I put it up a whole octave, and like there's like 5
Did some
layers.
Harmonies on that.
I did harmonies on that force damage. That force damage. It's all the same one clip that I used, and then I layered it and made it into a chord.
Well, it's beautiful.
It is beautiful.
We'll probably have that available if people want to listen to it. It'll be available somehow. So
yeah, it'll be in the, what do you call it, the Dooblydoo?
It'll be in the Dooblydoo, or maybe we'll put it in the next newsletter. We'll have some way for people to listen to it.
Yeah, I could put it on my YouTube, and then you could put a link, or
Jerry could put it on his YouTube. Yeah. So we'll do something with it. But yeah, force damage rules.
Force damage. Play your character.
Play your character, baby. Jerry, do you have any final thoughts for us?
Final thoughts. Yeah, no, this is my final thought. I just cooked it up on the spot. But, I think I've been thinking a lot about lately about the art that's around us when, like, we commonly engage in art as human beings, even the stuff that's we think is mundane. And maybe just, like, let's be present in our art that we're making. And I think that would be, whether that's, the food you eat, that's like a form of art,
sure,
or the music that you're listening to when you're doing that thing that you like, or that movie that you watch, or that show, pay attention to that stuff. And, obviously I feel like that's what, to me, this podcast is about when we're talking about stories, we're talking about tabletop games. Tabletop games it's a true art. It's a unique storytelling, but it's collaborative because the players get to screw with the GM's story, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's collaborative. It's kind of like, you know, when I play in a band, you know, I've played in a couple bands with Eric and I played in some bands with Ian and a lot of other people. And if you're writing music, sometimes you got to make compromises. You're like, yeah, he wants to play that guitar lick a couple extra times. I'm fine with that. I don't think the song calls for that, but you got to compromise at some point. And so it's very truly collaborative art creation. And so is, you know, this form of storytelling. And I found that, you know, I guess I've really only played D&D strongly for about 2 years. And that's what I'm actually finding that I like. In the beginning, I really liked the, you know, it's the Conan campaign. It was about fighting bigger and better monsters and going up levels and getting spells. But after you get your fair share of that, you're like, actually, I'm more interested in the storytelling aspect of this. So, like, I guess, like, my takeaway for people is, you know, pay attention to how we, you know, what kind of art you consume. Be present in the art that you consume. Don't just veg out and just say, I'm going to, you know, watch the same thing I've done 100 times and not, you know, just do it because you need an escape, but do it because, you know, intentionally and intentionally engage in your art is probably my biggest takeaway. And I've been finding that like really fruitful for me, you know, as when life gets hard, and including, but not limited to, the last 2 years in the pandemic. It's been really kind of a place of solace, and, you know, glad that D&D has been a part of that art consumption.
For sure. You heard it here first, folks. Ian, you think Jerry should sign us off?
Oh, absolutely.
Can I say stay sweaty, San Diego?
You can, yeah.
Stay sweaty, San Diego.
You heard it here first, folks. Stroking. 4 Stones rules. Titties. Like, share, subscribe.